Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/IDontWorkHereLady, where Karens continue to berate innocent customers because, hey, if you wear a lanyard around your neck, you're instantly an employee to them. And in today's episode, OP tries to tell a drunken idiot that he's not an employee, and it doesn't go well. I hope you enjoy the stories, and do hit that subscribe button for future tales. So a little context. I'm a firefighter/paramedic in a small suburb, roughly 7 square miles and 12,000 people. We have a single grocery store in the district where we pretty much visit every shift to buy ingredients for dinner. Because of that, we're pretty well known in that store and the surrounding community because it's such a small part of town. So on the last shift, my crew decides to stop by the grocery store in the afternoon right after we finished up with a call for a vehicle accident. We were still dressed in our turnouts, the bulky yellow gear we wear for fires and rescues. My partner and I leave our jackets in the engine and go inside to buy stuff to make buffalo chicken salad. So while we're grabbing the veggies, I hear, "Excuse me," right behind me. Now we do get a lot of questions from people in general, so I'm pretty used to being stopped in public while on duty. I say, "Yes, ma'am," and turn around to find a middle-aged lady standing next to the oranges. She then says to me, "Are these the only oranges you have?" Now I'm a bit dumbfounded and I reply with, "I don't work here, ma'am." And her response, which still baffles me, was, "Are you sure?" Now hearing that, my partner and I just exchanged confused looks. There we were, in our t-shirts and hats with fire department all over them, with our bright green radios on our waistbands and wearing baggy yellow pants with reflective striping. Obviously the uniform of one who works in the produce department. The woman got a bit annoyed at my silence and she held up an orange to my face and she says, "Oranges. These. Do you have any more, or are these the only ones you have?" Now hearing that, I'm still somewhat in disbelief, so I answer, "I work for the fire department." The woman says nothing, but she motioned to my partner, who was dressed exactly as I was and standing right next to me. And she says, "Excuse me, do you have any more oranges?" My partner snorts down a laugh and told her, "Yeah, I don't work here either." The woman then throws her hands up in exasperation and she walks the other way. We left the produce department to go get chicken and pretty much asked each other, "What the F?" only to be approached by her again at the front of the store. She says, "Excuse me, when will you have the rotisserie chickens again?" I'm still making an attempt to be polite, so I explained for the 4th time that we don't work at the grocery store because we're firefighters. The woman lets out a sigh, snaps and says, "Then you shouldn't be wearing a uniform in public." And I'm thinking, my bad, I guess. Guys, I am starting to think that some people just see a uniform and can't distinguish between them. Like, who are these people? Oh, a blue lanyard around your neck? You have to work at Walmart. Hospital scrubs in a hardware store? Oh, you must be an employee. And don't even get me started on people who assume that anybody that puts anything back on a shelf is immediately an employee. So a few months ago, I got back into law enforcement, where I'm now part of a specialized tactical unit. Most of the time, we're not in standard uniform. Instead, often we're in slacks, blue polos, and black tactical vests with the initials for our department on the front. I should also probably mention that I'm wearing a fairly noticeable belt with my sidearm, radio, cuffs, all the normal cop stuff. So this morning, I'm in the local location for a big box store with a very similar uniform. I was in the Lego aisle, which in this location backs up to the electronics section. So it's Legos on one side and video games in glass display cases with cheap locks that are easy to pick on the other side. So I'm standing there considering getting something for a friend in another state, whom I might be seeing next month, when a young woman walks up to me and asks if I work here. I then point to the lettering on the front of my vest and politely tell her, "No, I don't." She apologizes and then thanks me, and then she walks down the aisle a bit. I decide not to get anything for my friend, and turn to head out when I notice that she's in the process of picking the lock on the display case, which pops off before I can even ask what she's doing. At this point, the woman sees me and waves before grabbing a handful of $100 games out of the case and shoving them under her shirt, and she starts heading for the front of the store. Now at this point, I decide to leave my cart and follow her. Lo and behold, she walks right past the registers and through the security scanners, which light up and start wailing. The woman starts walking faster, heading towards her car. I catch up to her just as she's trying to open the car, and of course I then detain her and read her rights while the store manager and theft prevention officer catches up. We then head back into the store, where I radio for a patrol car, while the manager takes care of pulling the video and getting the paperwork in order. The whole time, the lady's just sitting there quiet, so I ask her what the heck is going through her head, and the woman's reasoning was, "I didn't think you could arrest me while you're shopping." And my jaw almost hit the floor at that point. No violence, no screaming or assaults, and that was certainly one of my odder experiences. Guys, what in the freaking world? Like, I can't believe this. Just when you think that no one can be that dumb. Like, the woman literally stole while a police officer was around, and then she said, "I didn't think you could arrest me while you're shopping." Like, I can't wrap my head around that. So last year, I was with my girlfriend in a bar at a British airport, waiting for a flight to the US. We had some time to kill because our flight was one of many delayed by the weather. The bar was busy with lots of people in the same situation, so after a long queue to get served, we luckily found a small table away from the crowd and sat down. On my way, I noticed a beer-bellied man and an angry-faced wife further back in the queue complaining very loudly. The man had the red nose of a heavy drinker, so I'll call him Rudolph. On this day, I was wearing a dark blue jacket and a pale blue shirt and black chinos. Very casual. Nothing like the staff, who are wearing black polo shirts with bright yellow piping and logos, gold name tags, and black trousers. After I'd been sitting with my girlfriend for a minute, we discovered that one of us was clumsy. I knocked over the drink with my elbow. I did the best to mop it up with the napkins on the table, but they were slightly less absorbent than the marble, so I was just steering beer around the table. So like the good-hearted and responsible citizen that I am, I suggested to my girlfriend, "I don't think anyone saw. Let's get out of here." But no, Miss Goody Two-Shoes said, "Go to the bar and ask for a cloth." I quickly asserted my manly dominance over her by going to the bar and asking for a cloth. So as I'm wiping up my lager, Rudolph approached me, and he looked to be about mid-30s. He also sounded about 5 pints ahead of me in the drinks race, and he taps my arm heavily. He then asked me, "Hey, why is it taking so long to get served?" To which I answered him, "It's busier than usual. It's probably the extra customers because of flight delays." And for some reason, my attempt to explain makes him angry. The man barks at me, slurring his words, and says, "All the more reason it should be all hands to the pumps behind the bar. Get me my drink." Now, I must have looked surprised by his anger, and I said, "Well, I suppose you're right." He then said loudly enough for everybody to have their heads turn, "Well?" I respond, "Well, what?" And this answer absolutely lit him up. I'm not sure of the exact words because he was trying to talk much faster than his mouth could manage. The point he was apparently trying to make through the shouting and spitting was that I should be behind the bar serving drinks, instead of tossing about tidying the tables. And that's when it clicked with me. He thought I was an employee. I then say to him, "Oh, I don't work behind the bar, I'm just..." Now that sentence would have finished, "because I'm a customer like you," but the guy cuts me off. I was still wiping up my mess with a large cloth in my right hand when the very drunk man grabs my right wrist and continued his tirade. I tell the man very clearly to let go of me, and my girlfriend saw what was happening and she quickly stood up. She then puts her hand around my right arm and asked me to stay calm. She then told Rudolph he doesn't work here. Now Rudolph didn't hear or didn't understand because his response to her was, "Mind your own effing business." And I was a little peeved by that. At this point, I see Mrs. Rudolph trundling towards us, pushing the crowd aside. The woman looked like a member of the rugby team's drag act, and I assumed she was coming over to tag team me. So I use both hands to lock his left wrist. I then pull him towards me, and as he instinctively pulled back, I changed from pulling to pushing, and I helped him fall backwards into the furniture. He went with the grace of a newborn elephant. His wife tried to help him up, but that project failed, and she fell right on top of him. While the two of them wriggled on each other, my girlfriend then says very clearly, "Do not hit him." We then start to walk out with my girlfriend in front of me. After a few more seconds of floor comedy, Rudolph gets up and follows us. I then turn to face him, and he takes a swing for me. A slow, wide, drunken, telegraphed right hook. I think a sedated stroke patient could have avoided it. I leaned back out of the way, and his fist went past me and carried on. His momentum meant that he continued with the punch until the rotation took him too far, and he fell over again. As he stood up from the beer puddle he landed in, I just laughed. And as you can imagine, this improved his mood enormously, and he charges for me. I slid left, and with a little push on his right side, he missed me again. This time he stayed on his feet though. When he turned, he would have gone for me another time, but he noticed the police had arrived at the bar. Mrs. Rudolph had called to the police and pointed at me and claimed that I assaulted her and her husband. Now, I was expecting some sort of support from the crowd. Like, I wasn't expecting a round of applause, but maybe someone saying, no, he didn't hit them. Instead, all I could see were couples gossiping and people trying to improve the position of their phones for filming. And cue the reforming. The police, as you'd expect, separates us, and one listened to Rudolph while the second listened to me. The one who was interviewing me and my girlfriend was interrupted by a third officer. They stepped away. It became clear that cop number 3 had seen the CCTV. So cop number 3 goes to Rudolph's interviewer and did the same. Cop number 2 explained that they had seen the video and they'd satisfied themselves and I wasn't to blame. He then asked me to go with them to make a statement. After discussing how long it would take, I decided that I'd rather not risk missing the flight, so I'd do it when we returned. I then took the officer's card. At that time, Rudolph and his wife start yelling. My guess would be that the police had given them the bad news about the video evidence. He wouldn't calm down, so they cuffed him and led him away. Cop number 2 told me that Rudolph was arrested and he'd be taken to the police station at the airport and possibly to the main station if he needed to be detained. Either way, his bags would be removed from the flight he was booked on because he wouldn't be allowed to fly today. When I returned to Britain, I phoned the officer as promised. Rudolph had been transferred to the main police station because he couldn't be interviewed until he was sober. After a night in a cell, he became very cooperative. He had one conviction for assault 11 years earlier, so the police decided to deal with his offense by giving Rudolph a formal caution. It doesn't carry any punishment, but it will be taken into account if he offends again. So going back to the day of the incident, after all the excitement was over, my girlfriend and I settled into our flight. She said she was very pleased with me for staying calm and not being more violent. I then mentioned that I had never joined the Mile High Club, and if she felt like rewarding my good behavior, we could try to create some privacy. And I will always remember her reply. She says, "You can F right off." Guys, I think this is possibly the first story I've ever read from this sub that had a drunk Karen in it. And it totally makes sense. If you're drunk, you might actually mistake a random person as an employee. As for all the other times, I really don't know. It's probably entitlement. So first off, to be fair, I used to work at the place this happened. I used to work as a pickup clerk at a nearby Giant, but I stopped working there about a year ago. But because of my job, I basically have the entire store memorized. I can quickly point out what row something should be in if I was asked. That, plus the fact that I sometimes chat with my old coworkers, could make someone assume that I still work there. Anyway, I was there yesterday looking for ingredients I was missing for dinner. But while I was looking, someone walked up to me. The woman was about the same age as me, and she had the same vibe of, I need to find something, but I'm too anxious to ask an employee, that I usually have. The woman gets my attention, then politely asked where something in another aisle was. I then pointed out to her, and she thanked me and goes on her way. I then went back to looking for my ingredients. About a minute later, someone else comes up to me and got my attention. Before I could even say yes, they start talking. Let's just call her Karen for now. She says to me, hey, I need to get whatever she needed. I tell her, oh, that's in aisle so-and-so. Karen then says, I've checked there. They're out. I then say to her, oh, well, sorry about that. Maybe they'll have some more later? I then turned to go back to my shopping, and then she said the next magic words. She says, can't you just go to the back and check? Now, of course, I was pretty confused at that, and I turned around to look at her and say, no, I don't work here. Karen immediately starts getting annoyed and says, yes, you do. I've seen you here before, and you just finished helping that other girl. I tell her, well, I used to work here, so I know where stuff is, but I quit a year ago. She then says to me, don't give me that. Why else would you be here all the time? Because I shop here? Karen starts to look genuinely pissed when I said that to her, and I decided that that was a perfect time to leave and avoid getting yelled at. I then continued getting what I needed, constantly checking over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't being followed, and probably looking incredibly suspicious. I finally got everything I needed and made a beeline towards the self-checkout. Now I should note that the self-checkout space is directly across from customer service, where you can look up and look directly at the self-checkout. I say that because when I finish bagging my stuff, I look up to see Karen from before talking to my old manager at the desk. I should also note that my old manager is a large chunk of why I decided to quit, mostly because she's controlling and constantly breathes down other people's throats instead of doing any actual work. Surprisingly, she was doing her job for once. and nodded along while Karen angrily rants at her. I decide to ignore the two and start heading towards the exit. But of course, that was the exact moment that Karen decides to look over and spot me trying to leave. She then points at me and yelled, "Her! That girl, right there." Now of course, everybody stopped and starts to stare at me, which would have made leaving a lot more awkward, so I just stopped in my tracks. My old manager leans over the counter to look at me and made a confused face, and then she turns back to the lady and says, "I'm sorry ma'am, but she doesn't work here anymore." Apparently being proved wrong by the manager is Karen's tipping point because she suddenly starts to scream at my manager, saying, "You are the manager. She's an employee, so tell her to help me now." Surprisingly, my old manager gathered up the gall to actually turn to me again at that and said, "Hey, do you mind helping her?" Now at this point, I was genuinely shocked at her question. I knew she would do anything for a customer at her employee's expense, but I didn't think it would extend to people who didn't even work for her. I then say to her, "Are you gonna pay me?" She tells me no, but before she could finish, I then tell her, "Then yes, I do mind. See ya." And before either of them can say anything, I walked out the store. I heard Karen start yelling again, but I couldn't properly catch what she was saying before I fully exited the store and headed towards my car. So I work at a fairly large, fairly well-known cancer treatment center. You've probably seen commercials for this place. I'm a scheduler, so I'm not clinical, but I do work in the clinic and often see patients after their appointments, so I do wear scrubs. Each team's scrubs are color coordinated so staff and patients know what team you're on, and it's a pretty good system. But outside of the center, they just look like everyday scrubs. You can probably see where this is going. So I was grabbing some snacks for the office on lunch break at a grocery store the other day when I get a tap on my shoulder. I turn to see a lady with a fairly full cart grinning at me. Let's call her Karen. Karen says, "Hey, can you take a look at the spot on my son's foot? It's been really bugging him and it's super swollen, and I'm just worried about it." Now, of course, I'm confused. She then points at this huge-ass bandage that she has wrapped around her toddler's foot. It does look big, but of course it's out of my range of expertise, so I explain, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm not a nurse or clinical or anything, I'm a scheduler." The Karen continues to give me this condescending smile and says, "But you are wearing scrubs." To which I say, "Yes, ma'am, I work in the clinic of this cancer center, but I'm a scheduler. I'm not medical, I don't have knowledge. You should take your son to a doctor or urgent care if it's that bad." Now, my easy and concise explanation goes right over Karen's head, and she says, "But you are wearing scrubs." I told her, "Yes, but I'm not a nurse." Now, I didn't know how else to reply because she kept staring at me, so I repeat the thing about urgent care and went back to looking at chips. And Karen wasn't happy. She blows up and says, "Is this because of money? Can't you do something nice for a single mom? Like, aren't you supposed to help people? Like, all you nurses and doctors care about is money. None of you really give a damn about the patient." I then snap at her and say, "Lady, I am not a nurse." She then continued her rant saying, "Well, you shouldn't be wearing scrubs then. That's fraud. That's impersonating a medical worker. That's a felony. I bet you want the attention because of the pandemic, don't you? You need to." At that point, I just laughed and grabbed my chips and walked away. I swear, I could hear her stomp her foot like a child. Not super climactic, but absolutely mind-boggling. And I can see the confusion, but I have no idea what this lady's logic was. Like, literally no medical professional is gonna give a diagnosis in the grocery store, unless it's an emergency. Wow, the ignorance was super strong with this Karen. Like, how many times does someone have to tell you I'm not a nurse before you get it? And with that brings us to another end of our /IDontWorkHereLady. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the ridiculous stories today. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, I'm gonna link it right here. A Psycho Karen attacks OP for looking terrorist. Like, it's such a crazy story, so go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.